I want to take you back to 1997. I don't know what you were doing, but in January of that year, I thought my life couldn't get any better. I was a network correspondent for CBS News, doing television and radio, covering big stories, making a great living in a beautiful suburb with my lovely wife, Barbara, and my two sons, Timmy and Brian. And I love those boys like I have never loved anyone or anything in my life. I couldn't think of anything that could go wrong. But as the year developed, Timmy, our oldest son, you see a picture here in a minute, he was a sweet kid, and he started having these temper tantrums. And he was slurring his words, and he would have trouble walking. He was having trouble in school. And my wife is a nurse, and she was really attuned to these things. And she took him to the doctor. The doctors couldn't find anything out, the regular pediatricians, so she went to a pediatric neurologist, and he was having a tough time diagnosing it. So finally in December, they arranged to have an MRI. And I was doing an overnight TV show called Up to the Minute for a week, and I came back on that Friday. It was right around Christmas time. And Barbara and the boys picked me up at the train station, and she had tears in her eyes. And I said, "What's going on?" And she told me that the MRI revealed that Timmy was suffering from a genetic disease called adrenoleukodystrophy. It's hard to spell, and it's very hard to cure. We found out a lot about this disease. It's passed on by the moms. Daughters are carriers, but they don't get it. Boys get it, but they don't get it until they're about 8. And by that time, it's a runaway train. The only known cure is a bone marrow transplant. And if you know anything about bone marrow transplants, there's a lot of timing involved. Timmy's disease had progressed to the point where we didn't have time to look all over the world for a perfect match. To find a bone marrow donor, you look at 6 called alleles. 6 is a perfect match. I was 5. That was as close as we were going to get. So I donated the bone marrow after watching this excruciating process in which they almost have to kill you to get you ready for the bone marrow transplant. It's intensive radiation and chemotherapy. He lost his hair, and it's just horrible to watch. Well, we got some good news that the bone marrow initially took, and we thought we were out of the woods. We were going to have our son back and healthy. But it didn't work out that way. He developed something called graft versus host disease. He lost the graft, and they told us to take him home and be with him for a few more weeks. And on June 3rd, 1998, just a few days before his 10th birthday, he passed away. Now, people ask the question, is there anything worse than losing a child? Well, the answer to me is yes, knowing that your only other child at that time was carrying that same gene and was probably facing that same fate. Well, because Brian, who was 2 years younger, had seen his brother go through this horrible process, we promised him we wouldn't make him go through a bone marrow transplant. We were going to find a cure some other way. And we worked as hard as we could. It was fortunate for us that the woman who directed the Clinical Research Center at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City was a neighbor of ours and a member of our parish. And because of that connection and because of the 2 boys, and I guess several other reasons, she became very involved in this case. And we tried everything, all these experimental protocols, and nothing was working. So Brian didn't have any symptoms for a while. At late 2000, they started to show up. And about that time, we think Dr. McGovern tipped off Make-A-Wish. We got a call that Make-A-Wish would like to send some volunteers to our house. And like Eric told you, and I'm about ashamed to say this, I really thought that Make-A-Wish was only for terminally ill kids. So I was not really thrilled when these 2 volunteers came to the house. Jim Byrne and Diane Carlson, 2 angels. They were so wonderful in this whole process. And they sat Brian down and they said, "Brian, would you like to meet Vinny Testaverde, then the quarterback of the Jets? No. Would you like to meet Dave Brown, quarterback of the Giants? How about David Wright at the Mets? Want a new computer? Have one." So this went on and on and on. And we're like, "Come on, Brian, it must be something you wish for." He goes, "Yeah, I want to meet Amanda." And we're like, "Who? Amanda?" Well, if you remember back in the 90s, and if you have kids, you might remember Nickelodeon, and they had a show called The Amanda Show. And the star was Amanda Bynes, who was a cute little, they compared her to Carol Burnett at the time. She's since fallen on some hard times, had some drug issues, got a little crazy. But back in 2001, she was just a great gal. So after Timmy passed away, we adopted a little baby boy. He did not have the genes that Timmy and Brian had, and he's now 20 years old, but he was a year when the Wish came along. So Make-A-Wish said, okay, we'll fly you through Houston, you leave with Grandma, and then we'll go on to LA. Well, I can't describe what a break this was for Barbara and I's parents. We don't have to think about doctors for a while. We don't think about pain. We don't have to think about what we think is going down the track. We had fun. We got picked up at LAX by this huge limousine. You know, Brian and I are going, first time in a limo this small, Brian? You know, that routine. We went to Studio City. They put us up at a great hotel. We went to Universal Studios. The next day, we got to meet Amanda, who was just an absolute sweetheart. Brian got to see her pals on the show and go to the dressing room, and then they had an al fresco lunch, just the two of them. Now, her dad's over here, and we're over here, but they're over there by themselves. And we're seeing Brian just laugh, and then food's coming out of his mouth, and then she's laughing, and they're throwing sandwiches at each other. They're just having a great time. So he loved that. Next day, we went to Disney World. I mean, it's like 5 wishes in one, right? Then the day after that was Friday, and that was, it was the best of times and the worst of times. Television is hard to make, it takes time. And it's really hard to make when it's kids, I have 10-year-old kids, right? 6 hours to tape 1 half-hour show. Sitting on very hard benches. Restrooms far away. But Brian loved every minute of it. That wish happened at a time where he really had all of his faculties. What this disease does eventually, it gums up the brain. They cannot break down long-chain fatty acids as we can. So the brain gets gummed up, and all the things the brain does stop working. Eventually, they can't walk, they can't talk, they can't swallow, they can't see, they can't hear. Brian did not lose his hearing, and I think towards the end he might have been losing his sight, but he was pretty good in that department, but everything else was tough. But on that airplane going back, I said to Barbara, you know, we're not the richest people in the world, but I want to do something for this organization. This is a fabulous organization. And eventually I did, and I'll get to that in a little bit. We go, I guess we're in 2003. The doctors have told us there's no other hope. So we took Brian to Lourdes. We're Roman Catholic, and we're very strong in our faith. And we were there, and we prayed for a miracle. We put Brian in the vase, and we just hoped that we would get a miracle. Well, I want to take it now to about 2006. Brian is really in tough shape. He's having seizures, and he's rushed to the hospital. I'm on assignment in Toronto, I think, or somewhere, and Barbara gets to the hospital, and he's very close to dying. And suddenly, he bolts upright, and she says there was this just look of rapture, of wonder in his eyes. And she said, "Did you see God?" He nodded his head. "Did you see your brother?" And he nodded his head, and he smiled. Well, we lost Brian about 2 weeks later. And you might be saying to yourself, you didn't get your miracle, did you? Yeah, we did. We didn't get the miracle we wanted. The miracle that we got was that Brian could die without fear and in peace, and that Barbara and I could deal with it. And we have dealt with it. So the Make-A-Wish people were, at the funeral, and everything was great. And they said to me, "Would you come help us?" So what can I do? Well, we put on some golf tournaments, and they have a huge golf tournament, and I emceed that for a few years, and then they put me on the board. Well, professionally, I was working hard. I was actually freelancing and probably busier than I'd ever been, but my heart just wasn't really in it. So one day I got a call from a guy named Alan Eisenson, wonderful guy. He was the program director at KFBK. And he said to me, "Would you like to come out and do the morning show here for us in Sacramento?" And I said, "No, thank you." Sacramento, 3,000 miles away, it's 106 degrees, I'm working in the biggest media capital in the world, why do I want to go to Sacramento? He called me back an hour later. He said, "Well, look, I know what you said, but our general manager is going to be in New York tomorrow, a man named Jeff Holden, who was sitting right over there. I don't know where he is now, but Jeff Holden was the best boss he ever had. He's also the best salesman I've ever met. He convinced me Sacramento was a great idea." Well, truth be told, and I don't think I've ever said this publicly, the real reason we came out here was a change of scene after everything we'd been through. And I came out, a 2-year deal, and in the contract I had it specified that I would have a golf tournament sponsored by the station for Make-A-Wish, and they did deliver on that. So along about, I don't know, 2012 or so, Jeannie Reeves, who was very active in Make-A-Wish, and she was the chair of River City Bank and one of our customers, said, I hear you have a connection to Make-A-Wish. And I told her a little bit about it. She said, well, come on the board. And I did. And it's been a great run. It really has. During my time on the board, in every metric, Make-A-Wish grew. I'd like to say I had something to do with it, but the truth is, Jennifer Stoll and her team are so good. Being a board chair is kind of like being the jockey on Secretariat. Just don't fall off. But what I want to emphasize to you this morning, if I could, is just the parents' experience. Once again, and please take this with you, Make-A-Wish grants wishes to children with life-threatening illnesses. As you heard Eric tell you, almost 80% of our kids do make it. But they don't know it all at the time. The parents don't know it. You don't know how you're going to pay for things. You don't know how you're going to keep your job. You don't know how you're going to take care of your other kids. So much worry. And this is your precious child, and you have a chance of losing him or her. But Make-A-Wish steps in, and it's just this great time out. We were at a national meeting a couple of years ago, and there was a symposium, and one of the doctors said, we now, the medical community, list Make-A-Wish as a palliative agent, like a pain reliever, without the side effects, with great side effects. So it's been a long morning. I don't want to let you go, but I want to just leave you with this. I love this organization. I love all of you for helping us. I love Jennifer. I love our kids, and I'm there for you anytime. You got my number. Thank you.